Soviet social imperialism is the biggest peace swindle and the most dangerous source of war today.
The speaker in the opening session of the United Nations was not an ambassador from any Western power, but the representative of the People's Republic of China, the world's largest communist nation.
Some people are terrified at the mention of the Soviet Union. This is superstition. Soviet social imperialism is nothing to be afraid of. It is outwardly weak. Alienated from the people, it is essentially feeble. It faces economic difficulties and ever-sharpening class contradictions among its nationalities.
Why do China and Russia keep criticizing each other? Shouldn't the two most powerful communist countries be allies to help promote international class struggle and the communist movement? Are the roads to socialism now so different? Communist ideology is indeed divided. To Karl Marx, socialism was merely a transitional stage between capitalism and communism, a stage where the government begins to assume the administration of the means of production and distribution of goods, which would eventually lead to a system where goods are owned in common and are available as needed. But there have been constant disputes on how best to achieve this goal. Lenin, Stalin, and Trotsky all had different ideas and different methods. Today, the leaders of the People's Republic of China consider themselves the only true heirs to the doctrines of Karl Marx. The history of China during modern times is crowded with imperialism, revolution, famine, chaos, and civil war. In 1911, Sun Yat-sen became the first president of the Provisional Chinese Republic. He hoped to combine some of the ancient and traditional concepts of Chinese society with the elements of modern democracy. But in the early 1920s, he failed to receive American or British support for his efforts to bring democracy to China. Consequently, he began to turn to Lenin's new regime in Russia for guidance and support. At about the same time, a strong supporter of Sun Yat-sen, Mao Zedong, was forming a new People's Study Society to discuss political matters. Unlike those members of the new Chinese Communist Party who thought they should concentrate on the urban proletariat as the Russians had done, Mao wanted the party to stress revolution among the rural peasants in China. Mao's brand of communism promised a new deal for millions of destitute Chinese peasants. And in fact, Mao's rise to power was largely based on his favorable treatment of the Chinese peasant, eviction of the hated rural landlord, land reform, and a disciplined peasant army. After a bitter 25-year civil war, Mao's principal opponent, Chiang Kai-shek, was defeated and fled to the island of Taiwan. On October 1st, 1949, Mao mounted the giant rostrum overlooking Peking's Tiananmen Square and proclaimed the formation of the People's Republic of China. Maoism has been one of the 20th century's great ideological success stories. In place of China's traditional Confucian value system, which emphasized the family structure and ancestral veneration, Mao established a new common standard and gave his people a sense of participation in a larger community, the nation. In the late 1950s, Mao directed the formation of a commune system, whereby more than 550 million Chinese were gathered into some 26,000 collectives. A 1958 editorial in the Peking People's Daily reported the following.
From private property, we will change to public property. All the land still held by individuals, private houses, animals, trees, etc., must progressively become the property of the commune. The last vestiges of personal property will slowly die out. Such an organization of production will favor the development of society and the national economy.
The commune, in Mao's mind, represented the ultimate stage of communism. It would mobilize all labor and set up a disciplined pool of manpower that can be switched from task to task in either agriculture or industry or army reserve at the direction of party planners. The first eyewitness reports of the commune system began to filter west.
It was all set in motion at one mass meeting in October 1958. The leading officials simply told us that at the conclusion of the meeting, all the cooperatives of our village would be united into a new organization called commune, a new term to all of us. At first, we thought it was just another method to broaden the government's control over production. We hardly realized how much it would mean to our living conditions. The announcement was made to sound very tempting, because from then on, we would be paid wages, and we could all eat as much as we wanted, free, in the commune mess hall. For nearly 2 months, the state kept its promise. But later, facts proved that this was just a short-lived bait.
At their worst, the communes were grinding, inhuman, exhausting, inefficient machines in which the peasants were literally cogs that could be moved by impersonal and unchallengeable direction from the party. At their best, the communes were efficient units in a beehive or anthill society driven eternally to greater productive effort, but enjoying certain material advantages and hopeful of gaining more. But the massive experiment proved ineffective, and the Chinese communists were forced to break the communes into much smaller and more decentralized units. Under Mao's leadership, China made dramatic strides. Famine was halted. Health standards were greatly improved, and literacy spread to millions. Railroads, dams, and power plants were constructed, and the Chinese enjoyed a standard of living unprecedented in their long and troubled history. But something else was also developing. By 1959, it became apparent to the outside world that a Cold War was taking shape between the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China.
The Soviet leaders have forsaken the Marxist-Leninist approach to the question of war. They encourage the illusion that war can be abolished while imperialism exists. They take a bourgeois pacifist attitude.
The Soviet leaders and their allies are seeking to weaken the world revolutionary movement by excessive emphasis upon legal and parliamentary means of overthrowing capitalism. They are trying to abandon the ideal of the dictatorship of the proletariat.
Mao was convinced that the Russians had betrayed the spirit of Marx, says China expert Alexander Casella.
Maoists want to uphold these ideals without sacrificing development, for the Chinese not only wish to develop their economy, but also and ultimately to create a new social order, a new system of values, and to realize the dream of the socialist man, whose motivation will no longer be personal profit, but the interests of the community.
To achieve this, Mao mounted a major attack on revisionist groups within the party, officials and bureaucrats who had become the new communist elite. In 1966, Mao announced the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution. Newsweek's Mel Elfin recorded the following in his diary when he visited China in 1972.
Her name is Pei Sao Rei. She's 25 now, highly intelligent, and radiates the softness of a Chinese version of the girl next door. Yet, when the Cultural Revolution was at its fiercest, Miss Pei led a Red Guard faction at Peking University that broke up classes, destroyed countless books and artworks, and eventually forced the university to shut down.
It soon became clear that Mao's ultimate purpose was to destroy the very party structure he had helped create. Thousands of communist officials were publicly disgraced, and the government bureaucracy, for a time, was in shambles.
Mao had concluded that the only way to save a revolution from a hardening of the arteries was to rejuvenate it from time to time with fresh fervor.
In short, Mao saw the Cultural Revolution as merely the first in an unending series of revolutions. Endless revolution. This is what Maoist socialism came to mean. In theory, if a static class-bound state could be prevented, a society of selfless socialists who would have no need of formal government could be created. In practice, however, the cost of ongoing upheavals was enormous. Some experts believe the turmoil cost China 3 years of economic growth. Meanwhile, rivalry between the Soviet Union and China erupted into several open battles along their border. Mao defined the USSR and its social imperialism as the main threat to China. Then, in one of the boldest actions of his life, he threw open the gates of China to a visit by a U.S. president. After the death of both Mao and his assumed successor, Premier Zhou Enlai, in 1976, China seemed poised for another period of turmoil. But power was quickly seized by the moderate wing of the party, led by Hua Kuo-feng, the new chairman. Hua began an extensive propaganda campaign against Mao's widow, Chiang Ching, and her more radical colleagues. She and other so-called radical leaders were quickly rounded up and arrested before they could cause any trouble. And the Peking government seemed firmly controlled by the very party and government bureaucrats Mao had attacked during the Cultural Revolution in the 1960s. As the world watched these dramatic events unfold in China, one question persisted. Must socialism be achieved only through totalitarian measures, as happened in China and Russia? In much of Western Europe, socialism seems to combine successfully with democracy. Without the bloody confrontations predicted by Karl Marx or the repressions instituted by Soviet Russia or China. As one professor of government, William Ebenstein, points out,
the main principles of modern socialism are relatively simple. First, the recognition that every member of the community is entitled solely because he is a human being to a minimum standard of living. Second, socialism is committed to putting full employment at the top of social goals to be supported by public policy.
But how is this best done? By nationalization, the takeover by the state of the means of production? Or by taxation and fiscal policies? Or by giving private industries more freedom to experiment, to take risks, and thereby create more jobs? These are vital questions. How to give people the basic kinds of security and protection they need. A responsive government. Without letting the bureaucracy become static, unwieldy, and unresponsive to genuine social needs.